When Calls the Heart, Season 10, Episode 12, Starry Nights, Season Finale. It's been 3 weeks since Elizabeth and Lucas called off their wedding at the train station. Tomorrow is Election Day. Governor Belfour and Lucas are duking it out for the title of governor. Rosemary and Lee are getting Goldie ready for her baptism. She's going to wear the same christening gown that Rosemary wore when she was a baby. Lee and Rosemary already had Elizabeth as the godmother, but they decided to ask Henry to be the godfather. And when Lee went to ask Henry, then Henry said, I don't know. I'm not too familiar with God, and if you ask my son, he'd say I'm not familiar with being a father either. Henry was honored that they thought of him as to be the godfather, but he said he had to think about it. Everyone gathered in the saloon to listen to Lucas's election speech on the radio. He said he never thought he'd be running for governor to stop our governor from trying to change our way of life. He wants to stand for everyone who deserves a fair shake. Joseph is working on his sermon for the baptism. He seems to be stuck. He says he wants to give Lee, Rosemary, and Marigold more than just fine. And he's also worried about Henry. Minnie says she was worried about him getting rest. She said, "Come home. The words will come." On election day, all but 22 people voted. And Mr. Yost came up with this idea earlier about wearing pins that say, "I voted." Rosemary said everyone needs to vote because in a previous election, the person won by just 20 votes or something like that. And Elizabeth said, "So how are we going to figure out those who haven't voted?" And Mike pointed to the pen, and Rosemary said, "That's right." So they ran out into the streets looking for people. They commandeered Molly and Maggie's help. And those who didn't have a pen, they urged them to vote. At the end of the day, once all the voting was over, Elizabeth still hadn't voted. And Rosemary was on her way home. Sidebar, to vote on this show, they had a card with Balfour's name on it and Lucas's name on it. And all they had to do was put an X on one. But they were going in the booth. They were going behind the curtain and voting. And since Elizabeth was the last one, she even went into the booth. Why did she was the last person. Why would she have to go into the booth? All she had to do was mark her vote. Okay. Once Rosemary left, Nathan came in to vote. In that awkward demeanor, Elizabeth said, "Nathan, what are you doing here?" Nathan said, "To vote." She said, "Oh, right." While they were both in their respective booths, Elizabeth said to Nathan, "I was worried you weren't going to show." Nathan said, "Well, I was on duty, but I was always intending to make it back on time." They were talking about Elizabeth thought Nathan was avoiding her. He apologized for overstepping because last week he came to her and asked her what did she really want when she was thinking about going with Lucas. She said, "You were just trying to help. It may have been hard to hear, but I appreciate what you said." Nathan walked around to her voting booth and said, "Elizabeth." She lightly gasped and turned around, and he said, "Good night." She said, "Good night." Sidebar, like I said last week, I'm over Elizabeth and Nathan. I hope they have something different in mind. Joseph and his family met up with Elizabeth and little Jack and Rosemary Lee and Marigold in the front of Lee and Rosemary's house. And Joseph said, "Where is Henry?" And Rosemary looked at Lee and said, "Lee?" And Lee said, "Have faith." And they all headed to the church for the baptism. The congregation was singing, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." As they were finishing the song, Henry rushed through the door. He told Elizabeth, "I couldn't find a tie." Most of the town was waiting in the saloon around the radio to hear the results of the governor's race. By a margin of a nail-biting 21 votes, we have a new governor, Governor Lucas Burchard. Everyone began to celebrate. It was raining in Capital City. Lucas was leaving the election venue and he was telling everyone good night and thank you. And as he was walking with his umbrella, the lights of an automobile came on and Lucas looked like he was trying to see who it was that turned the lights on him. In an annoyed way, he said, "What are you doing here?" Elizabeth was at Jack's grave. She was telling him that he was her great love, and the thought of going through that again. When she lost him, something in her just broke. She said she loved Lucas, but she thinks she was looking for something safe so she wouldn't get hurt again. Because what if she broke a second time and couldn't put the pieces back together again? She couldn't risk it, especially having little Jack to think of. But that wasn't fair to Lucas. He deserves to have a great love. We both do. Henry drove up to a house surrounded by a white picket fence. On the mailbox it said S10. He knocked on the door. When it opened, he said, "Abigail." While Elizabeth was still with Jack at the grave site, Nathan rolled up and he got off Newton. Elizabeth said, "Nathan." He said, "Elizabeth." She said, "What are you doing here?" He took his hat off. He said, "I don't know. I was just..." Then he said, "What are you doing here?" And she said, "I was just..." And then gallops came from behind them, and it was Bill coming up on the horse. Nathan said, "Bill, what is it?" Bill said, "It's Lucas. I need you both." Now, they both got on their horses and followed Bill down the road, and the show goes off. When Cost a Heart will return in 2024 with season 11. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe.